This is a joint event, jointly organized by Institute Masa Depan Malaysia and the All-Party Parliamentary Group Malaysia on Sustainable Development Goals, APPGM-SDG, in partnership with the Economic Planning Unit, EPU, and the Malaysian CSO-SDG Alliance and the UN Malaysia country team. We had a great session just now, and what we've seen is we have a lot of data. We want to get data, but at the end of the day, we talk about data sharing and everybody getting the shared amount of data. And with having all these plans, I think at the end of the day, it's all about the implementation. How do we get this into reality to make those changes that we need to as well? I think that's a very important thing that everyone wants to push through as well, to make everything into reality, to have a joint front, a united point of governance as well, to push everything through. I think the more important thing is the real initiative to make that change. That is the real question. Whether people in decision makings up there would really want to acknowledge and to make that change forward as well. All right, thank you so much. Let's move on to our next session on sustainability and climate change. With that, I'd like to pass the session over to the moderator for this morning. She's a green economy analyst. She's also with WWF Malaysia and fellow Masa as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Zara Pang. Zara, I think your mic is muted right now, and maybe you can unmute it. Yeah.
Thanks very much for the reminder, Sharzan.
Most welcome.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining our discussion. As a quick recap, this session covers Chapter 5 of Malaysia's VNR, titled Sustainability and Climate Change. The two goals covered here are Goal 12 on responsible consumption and production, and Goal 13 on climate action. Now, I'm just going to flash a couple of images up here to illustrate my next point, and it shouldn't be long. So we are currently preoccupied with the health and economic impacts of COVID-19, and rightly so, as challenges threaten our health and well-being and impact everybody, but the disadvantage most of all. However, we also need to remember that there are two even larger crises in progress. We've seen in the past years a number of extreme weather events impacting Malaysia, leading to flooding, landslides, and droughts. And globally, in this month alone, we are seeing heat waves and forest fires in the US, while in Europe, India, Japan, and China, we have seen massive floods, and in some cases, landslides, leading to, unfortunately, some loss of lives. Climate change and biodiversity loss may not be as imminent to us as COVID-19, but they will impact us on an even larger scale unless we take steps to curb them and to adapt to the changes in climate which have already been locked in by our past emissions. Apart from climate change and biodiversity loss, there are also issues of resource efficiency. Sorry, let me get rid of this. There are also issues of resource efficiency and pollution. While some go hungry, we throw away an estimated 22,793 tons of food a day. And it's not just a waste of food, but also the resources taken to produce and transport that food as well. It is estimated that we produce 0.94 million tons of mismanaged plastic waste every year, of which a third could be making its way into our oceans, which affects our marine environment, including our fisheries. In 2019, we threw away 4 million tons of hazardous waste. And that is just the legal hazardous waste. In Klang Valley, we have seen at least 4 water supply disruptions from pollution in 2020 alone. The good news is that we still have time to avert the worst of these disasters. In order to do this, we need to achieve goals 12 and 13. Goal 13 will align us towards addressing both the causes and effects of climate change, including mainstreaming climate change into national policy, strategies, and planning, while Goal 12 puts the focus on consumption and production for a green economy, which we have heard from in the last session. As we know, economic activities are the main drivers of environmental degradation. So success in Goal 12 means that Malaysia will well be on the path to developing an economy and society which will help avert the worst disasters, being less polluting, more resource efficient, and more resilient to the future tsunamis of climate change and biodiversity loss. Success in these goals are crucial for the well-being of current and future Malaysians. So, to discuss our progress on these goals, I'm pleased to introduce our fantastic panel. From government, we have Dr. K. Nagalendran, Deputy Secretary General of CASA, the Ministry of Environment and Water. From Parliament, we'll have Young Berhormat Tuan Wong Tak, the Member of Parliament of Bentong. Representing civil society, we have Ms. Lavanya Rama Iyer, Head of Policy and Climate Change at WWF Malaysia. And finally, from Urban East, which is the Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cities and Community Wellbeing, we have Puan Nurliza Hashim, who is the CEO of Urban East and also a fellow of Institute Masa. Each panelist will have 10 minutes to discuss their perspective. Please start us off, Dr. Nagu.
Right, thank you very much, Zara. Very good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'd like to thank the organizers, MASA, APPGM, SDG, CSO Alliance, EPU, and of course the UN Country Office for having this very important discussion at this period of time. And I would like to congratulate EPU for successfully tabling this VNR report at the recent high-level political forum at the UN on 15th of July. And I think the current VNR document that we have, the 2021 report, is very exemplary because it took a whole of nation approach by having many multi-stakeholder dialogues in developing this document. And this chapter on sustainability and climate change is very important. But before we go further, I think it's only fair that I just introduce CASA, or Ministry of Environment and Water, which is a very new ministry, a very new combination of environment and water. And what we have in CASA is water sector is rather intact. Nearly every dimension of the water sector is with CASA, except for Bekalan Air Luar Bandar, or rural water supply, which is under the Ministry of Pembangunan Luar Bandar. But when you look at environment, what is with CASA is virtually the brown issues, the pollution issues. So we have Department of Environment with us, looking very much into scheduled waste, whereas solid waste is still with KPKT. And looking at green issues is with KETSA, and blue issues is with MAFI. MAFI is the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Industry. So while we have the name environment, but we probably just looking at the brown issues, whereas green and blue are with other ministries. So as a new ministry, we have put up in our webpage, which is www.casa.gov.my, what are our plans from now till 2030. So we have got this document, which is there in public domain, called Environmental Sustainability in Malaysia. It virtually spells out what CASA plans to do from now till 2030 in 4 main pillars. One is empowered governance, 2 is green growth, 3 is strategic collaboration, and 4 is social inclusiveness. For example, under empowered governance, we've got issues such as river quality. You can check out this document on our webpage. Issues of biosafety. Biosafety is with us, although biodiversity is with KETSA. So biosafety looks at the regulating of living modified organisms and the products thereof. This empowered governance has got elements of course, climate change, looking at what are climate reductions based on our nationally determined contributions. Under the green growth pillar, we have elements of the government green procurement. We are hoping to increase government green procurement to 50% by 2025. And of course, under the pillar of strategic collaborations, we've got many collaborations with world bodies, including the UN office here in KL. But most recent, we have been working with World Bank to develop our circular economy roadmap for plastics. And when we talk about social inclusiveness, there's a huge project, a very ambitious project, trying to create 10,000 kilometers of river trails, trying to get the rakyat together with the government and other stakeholders to build these river trails, which have got multi-dimensional use, from recreation to be deterrent to river pollution. Like Zara said, we had episodes of river pollution. So we thought by creating this river trail and there are people using it, you will deter wrongdoings to the river. And moving on, under CASA also, we have the Majlis Air Negara, a very powerful council that looks at water issues, chaired by the Prime Minister. And for the first time now, we have got a Climate Action Council, MyCAC, Malaysia Climate Action Council, chaired by the Prime Minister of Malaysia, which had its first meeting on 13th of April. And many things came out of that meeting, and I will not go to details because, for example, that meeting recommended to come out with low carbon mobility blueprint, low carbon cities framework, which we are happy to note that we just launched the low carbon cities framework, low carbon cities master plan on 13th of July, just recently at one of our seminars, and also to look at carbon markets. But one other important committee that sits within CASA is the MEXCO. This is a committee where the minister, together with his colleagues at the state level, all the environment ESCOs, as well as the ministers of environment of Sabah and Sarawak, sit together and discuss environmental issues. And I think this platform is very, very important because it's very operational. It looks at how to mainstream some of the climate actions that's between federal and state. The second point is, while being a young ministry, many of these issues that CASA inherited has been long discussed. For example, we are working very hard on plastics. I mean, when we were in MATSTAC, we came out with this roadmap to a zero single-use plastics by 2030. That roadmap is still very much active. And we are happy to announce that in the last meeting, Majlis Mesyuarat Negara by President Tempatan, many state governments have now got on board to join us in the journey towards reducing plastics by introducing user pay principle. That means you pay 20 cents for a plastic bag, hope it becomes a deterrent. Of course, the big mantra is for you to bring your own bags from home, but if you forget, you got to pay and hope it'll be a deterrent. So that's there. But while that's there as an initial deterrent, CASA is now complementing that roadmap with a circular economy roadmap for plastics, which we developed with the help of the World Bank to try to circularize this whole plastic economy, because as Zara correctly put out the statistics, as every minute I speak, one lorry of plastics is going to the ocean. So we need to divert it into a more circularized economy. And that roadmap, we have had consultations, and we thank you all for your very good feedbacks. And we hope to launch it after going to the cabinet process by October this year. And something that we are developing at the same time is the carbon markets. Well, climate change is a big issue, and carbon markets is something that we are developing, a carbon market guidance document, which we recently had some consultations. And moving forward, we'll be working with the Ministry of Finance to look at cap and trade mechanisms, putting a price for carbon. These are all still, I will say, very much in its infancy, putting a price for carbon, but that is something that we are planning with the Ministry of Finance. Moving forward, I know many countries have also now started to make a pledge of net zero by 2050. What we are saying at the moment, Malaysia is ready for a low carbon pathway, and that's shown by the plans that we have come out, like the low carbon cities master plan, something that's been in the works for quite some time, which we hope will get passed by cabinet soon, is the low carbon mobility blueprint. So we are ready in this journey of a low carbon trajectory. But what will complement our work is this long-term low emission development strategy that we hope will start work soon. We've got the funds from EPU, and we hope it will be adopted next year. We also have inherited as a ministry some policies which are quite dated. For example, the climate change policy is 2009. We are now looking at reviewing the climate change policy. Many of you all have been involved in the review of the environment policy dated 2002, and they have been doing many robust discussions. I know now that document is with state governments to have a look to give us feedback. The other thing that we are working now is the National Adaptation Plan. We're just trying to secure some funding from the Green Climate Fund to help us develop our National Adaptation Plan. So all this work will complement SDG. But I'm not trying to paint a picture, although CASA is new, it's only slightly more than 1 year, but Malaysia has taken very initial steps to address environmental issues As you know, the third Malaysian plan document came up in 1976, one of the exemplary documents. Even before the Rio Earth Summit, Malaysia has already had the tenets of sustainable development in a very futuristic document such as the third Malaysia plan. We had our Environmental Quality Act way back in 1974, our Wildlife Act in 1972. So there are many things that have already been done for a very long time, as we all know. The third point is, I think as we discuss, this chapter discusses climate change. Something that I noticed, probably I don't have the answer for this, probably my colleagues in EPU will have. I noticed in the VNR report, we did not cover SDG 14 and 15. SDG 14 is life below water and 15 is life on land. Very, very important nexus to complement our work on sustainability and climate change. And I think a recent report coming out from the IPCC, and which is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, and the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, in early July, was that this climate change and biodiversity nexus has to be strengthened. And I think your first slide is spot on. I think while yes, we are facing this pandemic and we feel it right, but what really brought about the pandemic is humans' mischief with nature. And I think your final wave, which is a huge wave, shows the biodiversity loss. Yes, that's going to hit us if we do not change our ways. So it has been very compartmentalized, even in the global arena, looking at climate change, because climate change hits you directly on the pocket because it's got to do with fossil fuel production and all that. And many a times biodiversity does not get that kind of attention. And I think for a country like Malaysia, being mega biodiverse rich, I think it's very important. And the signs are already there. I mean, we have lost our rhino. Very recently, the Sumatran rhino has been wiped out from the Malaysian landscape. And what we are really concerned, more megafaunas and majestic iconic species such as the tiger may find the same. And I think before we reach those tipping points, these are signals that we can take action. And I think there's a complementary role that climate change can do to assist with biodiversity. And the similar way, biodiversity has many solutions for the climate problems that we face. And as we know, without doing anything, nature provides so much. I mean, ecosystem services. In fact, much of the carbon emission is absorbed by the oceans and terrestrial ecosystems. One equation that needs to come into the Malaysian context, because we are very unique, we are a mega biodiverse country, is this whole nature's solution or ecosystem-based approach towards solutions that we are facing on environment, including ethno-knowledge systems that I think the earlier speaker spoke about, where I think while we are trying to introduce new knowledge systems to the Orang Asli, but I think they themselves have got a wealth of knowledge that we can leverage upon. And my next point is, which I think my colleague from EPU in the earlier panel was speaking. I mean, we have a lot of plans, a lot of policies, but I think something which is really important is resource mobilizations to make these policies happen. It's just not money, it's also the manpower, the capacity to do it. And I think for this, market-based interventions need to come into play. For example, when speaking to colleagues in Penang, when they introduced that 20 cents, and in Penang, the 20 cents does not go to the retailer, it goes to the state government to do work to improve the environment and for the well-being of the rakyat. They have collected about 9 million ringgit just from that 20 cents. And that's used to improve the environment. And these are measures that can be used to help to fuel environmental activity. And I think the 11th plan, the Malaysian 11th plan, spoke a bit about natural capital accounting. And I think this needs to take more mainstream, because we see many development projects sometimes do not take in the value of biodiversity or value of nature. And some other measures that I think we need to do on a more global scale is this whole dichotomy of the discussion in environmental diplomacy is the South versus the North. But I think it's a fair argument to say that developed countries also must live up to their commitments on the terms of means of implementation, in terms of finance, technology transfer, and capacity building to developing countries and Malaysia to help us move towards a more sustainability trajectory. And I totally agree with Prof. Jamal from the earlier discussion. This whole pandemic has made us, I think, hopefully has made it. While I don't see the actions moving to that directions, but I think it has nudged us to rethink development. Because even with all the wealth you probably have, you probably are tied down in your house because the pandemic is raging out there. So probably we need new measurements of growth. And I know ideas like inclusive wealth index was mooted at one time. And I think these things need to take mainstream, because then it gives a true development perspective of the country, taking into account environment and social. And my final point is, of course, something which everybody speaks about, behavioral change. And this has been the power of one. So I think all of us have got the ability to make a change towards a better environment. And just to respond to, I think, an earlier panel, what we have done in CASA is now we've got this Wakaf IA, where people contribute to this Wakaf, and we have undertaken projects, water projects in rural areas and also in certain kampongs to improve the water quality and all that. And of course, our Denai Sungai Kebangsaan, which I spoke about earlier, some of the initiatives which CASA is doing. A point that I noticed in the VNR report, because I was going through it, something that I need to correct. In 1992, Malaysia made a pledge to the world that we will keep 50% of our land under forest and tree cover. What I see in page 100 of this report, they have forgotten the tree cover. So it's not just forest cover, it's forest plus tree cover. So these are very, very important, and I will end there for now, and I look forward to interacting during the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nagu. A good summary of work that government is already doing on plastics roadmap, carbon markets, and low carbon pathway, an emphasis on the importance of the natural environment to complement work on climate change, and also how we need to mobilize our resources, not just money, but also skills and manpower, and that it's also up to all of us, behavioral change, to do what needs to be done. I've had word that YB Wong Tak is having trouble joining us for the moment, so we will have him at the end of the session. I would like to call Puan Nurliza next. Puan Nurliza, are you there?
Yeah, hi, Zara. I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, Zara. And Assalamualaikum and very warm greetings to all our esteemed panelists and all members in the audience. First and foremost, congratulations to the Government of Malaysia and EPU on the successful reporting on the SDGs implementation for Malaysia and its submission of the VNR 2021, where we know 42 countries has actually submitted this year, and Malaysia has made their presentations at the recent HLPF. So yeah, a big congratulations. I just want to make a first note, that this year's VNR is on the theme of sustainable and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic that promotes economic, social, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. And this actually has a focus on building inclusivity and how effective is the path for countries to actually achieve their 2030 agenda. What I also note that because of this focus, our reporting is very much focused on SDG 1, 2, 3, 8, 10, 12, 13, 16, and 17. And but I think that it must be noted also that for Malaysia, which has such a high rate of urbanization in the country, which is at about 78% today, and where we have almost 24 million people living in the urban areas, SDG 11 should have been a key part of our VNR 2021. And that should also be part of the HLPF focus of discussion, because with the pandemic, cities are on the front line of the pandemic, and where we see most of the cases happening in cities and in dense areas. So I think this is where the importance of SDGs to be more integrated interlinked in nature, and SDG 11 has one of the highest strong positive correlation with other SDGs. But of course, today, especially this panel which I'm in, we are discussing about Chapter 5 of the Voluntary National Report 2021, which is on Goal 12, Responsible Consumption and Production, as well as Goal 13, which is on climate action. So thank you to Dr. Nagu, who have given us a good insights of what CASA is really doing. And I think some of that is also not really well reflected in the report. But I also observed that out of the 10 targets of the SDG 12, we reported on 5 out of the 10 targets. And for SDG 13, we reported 2 out of the 5 targets in SDG 13. I think I like to highlight 4 key things here because we've only got less than 10 minutes to reflect our thoughts on the VNR. And the first one is going back to the need for interlinkages and integration. I think that on a more general observation, the interlinkages of these SDGs are not well reflected in our VNR report. Especially for SDG 12 and 13, their interlinkages with other SDGs actually will help to give better understanding on the importance of their SDGs and how this will actually contribute towards Malaysia's sustainability agenda. Because we've been discussing and I hear some of the issues that have been raised since yesterday on our silo approach in planning, implementation. And if our SDGs are also reported in a silo manner, just reflecting to the targets, I guess the general understanding on what the importance of this SDG is will not be able to be grasped by the general public. You know? So for example, where SDG 12, when we talk about sustainable consumption and production, it actually has a very strong and important influence in targets of clean water and sanitation, which is SDG 6. Also a strong link to affordable energy and clean energy, which is SDG 7. Of course, very much on sustainable cities and communities, which is SDG 11. And even on life on land, which is SDG 15, and partnership, which is SDG 17. So this is where when we talk about sustainable management of natural resources, for example, which is target 12.2, which we reported on, it talks, we emphasize on the resources, resource use of efficiency of water, energy, you know. But I think relating water, energy, material flow to target 6.4, 7.2 and 11.B would actually improve the whole objective of why we are focusing on the sustainable management of natural resources. And it will also help us to improve water quality, you know, promote use of other forms of solutions, you know, that will encourage our goals to be met in a better and effective manner. Because I think that is one of the things that we are trying to highlight on how this VNR would be more effective when looking into it. Because the VNR is actually a progress reporting document, and it's the same for SDG 13. And you know, climate change itself is a virtuous cycle. And it's very important for plans and actions to be more interlinked and coordinated at all levels, you know, because we know that 90% of natural disasters over the past 30 years are all related to climate change and extreme weather. And having this link to measure, plan, and program would actually have a better impact in terms of how we report on our progress. The second point I'd like to make is actually on further localization of the SDGs. I think there's a lot of local actions that has been done. Of course, there's a lot more to be done as well. And I think this is where how does a VNR report also address some of the local actions. We see it in the boxes that has been highlighted here and there as examples of what actions has been done. But I think that, as you know, like moving forward, as what Dr. Zunika has mentioned, moving forward, there will be more interaction with industry players, local players. But I also think that in doing that, we also need to focus on SDG targets, which require more localization of SDGs. You know, for example, Zara started talking about food security. You know, so SDG 12.3 talks on reduction of food waste. You know, so we did not report on 12.3. But I think urban food security is becoming even more important with the pandemic today, and setting these localized actions to ensure food sustainability is very crucial. So in the work that we do in Urbanese, actually, we've been preparing Malaysian cities to actually start their SDG roadmaps. So we call it the program under the Malaysia SDG cities. And we are also encouraging subsequent to that for them to prepare their VLRs. So we have Subang Jaya and Shah Alam being the first city from Malaysia to actually also submit their VLR to HLPF this year. So I think, but in the work that we do and the cities, you know, the integration of the local actions with the national actions is something that is actually very difficult for us to even align. We can align in terms of the targets, but to understand what national is doing and how local is actually ensuring that it's more effective is something that is still needs work to be done. So this is where I think going back on the next point, which I would like to highlight, is also how could we actually set targets and mechanism that could translate these national targets better, or some of the policies and programs that Malaysia wish to achieve at the national level to the local players. So for example, we have identified a lot of national targets and achievements in the report. In the case of recycling, for example, we reported 30.67 recycling rate. But how does that translate to local rates, you know? Because we know what is important is actually to have reduction of waste to landfill, and also to address waste diversion, which is also important for circular economy, and local governments actually can work with local industries to address this. So translating the local, the national targets into very localized targets and mechanisms for implementation is something very, very crucial, I think, you know, in moving forward, as well as in, and which is also missing in the reporting. And of course, we hear it from yesterday on the need for inclusiveness. And I think this is even also important for SDG 12 and SDG 13, because especially for climate action, it really requires an inclusive process, political commitments, and also the local communities to understand what these climate actions are. So SDG 12.8, SDG 13.3, both talks about awareness and information, and how local governments' efforts and stakeholders needs to be reflected. So I think those are the 4 key things that I just wanted to address, because the targets actually could easily be reflected in some of the local actions that cities are already undertaking. And it's important to acknowledge what they have done. And at the same time, how do we formalize that as part of the national report and national actions. So thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Just to very quickly summarize, I think what you said was that you emphasized that the interlinkages of SDG are very important, although we might not have seen it reflected in the VNR report. I think I was actually quite happy this morning to hear our previous session very heavily emphasize on green economy and environment as well. So at least if we're not hearing it in the report, it's good that we're hearing it here. You also talked about the importance of local actions. So how does local government and cities especially, what role do they play in implementing SDGs? And for example, you were talking about raising awareness and information to the citizens and how they can help address the issues of climate change and responsible consumption. Thank you very much, Nalisa. I would like now to invite Ms. Lavanya Rama Iyer from WWF Malaysia. She will give us the CSO perspective.
Thank you, Zara. Just give me a second. Assuming you can. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting WWF Malaysia to be on this panel. I will focus my interventions on the way forward, as my esteemed fellow panelists have, I think, given you a flavor of the content of the VNR on these two chapters that we are discussing today. And this is really based on WWF's and my personal experience in participating in the process of SDG implementation in the country as an NGO member of the governance structure for SDG implementation, as mentioned by Puan Zunika yesterday, which is also reflected in the VNR 2021, as well as a member of the CSO SDG Alliance and the APPGM SDG, which is undertaking important efforts to localize SDGs at constituency level. But before going into that, allow me to first congratulate EPU under Tokpa's leadership for adopting a very open, inclusive process in preparing this VNR report. Indeed, while the timeline was very short, 6 months, getting all hands on deck in an open and transparent manner, it enabled the task at hand to be completed successfully and with rich content in providing a variety of perspectives. So multi-stakeholder consultations, which included government, academics, CSOs, corporates, all sitting together to raise their concerns, provided a valuable platform for understanding different concerns and to carve out together a document that generally synthesized these concerns towards charting a way forward. And it is appreciated that there was genuine trust showed to the various stakeholders involved by sharing the full draft texts of the report for feedback and comments. Unfortunately, I think, and this is a general comment, we see nowadays a trend of just sharing snapshots in presentations of things that are being undertaken for stakeholder consultations, which doesn't really provide the full ability of giving proper comments by these stakeholders. So really congratulate EPU for having that openness and trust in providing those full draft texts for feedback and comment. And the team at EPU, along with the consultants appointed to assist them in navigating this process, should really be highly commended for embracing Goal 17 on partnerships in this process. However, having said that, we hope the momentum and goodwill built in this process will continue with more regular meetings of the various clusters and working groups that have been formed as part of the governance structure under EPU, which Puan Zunika mentioned. The process, I believe, has been beneficial, and properly operationalizing the governance structure already in place will support the important work being undertaken to meet the 2030 agenda, as well as the shared prosperity vision. The same level of open engagement that was employed in preparing the VNR should continue in crafting future roadmaps, plans, and processes in implementation, not just within EPU, but also across all other government agencies, as well as monitoring implementation to enable a robust, adaptive approach being put in place. The meetings of these clusters, their task forces, as well as the National Steering Committee, therefore, should be convened very regularly, perhaps every quarter, with some set agendas to do this and systematically monitor progress. Now, that is my general opening remarks, recommendation for the way forward, which I think no doubt many other speakers in this forum will also have already made or will be making. In terms of the goals we are specifically looking into now, goals 12 and 13, I have 3 broad recommendations. And I think quite a lot of it has already been reflected by both the earlier speakers. But let me give my perspective on this. The first is that nature should be integrated into all goals and be seen as central in achieving our SDG agenda. Dr. Nagu, I think, mentioned this quite strongly in his intervention as well. So the performance on how we manage our fabulous natural endowments is very much integral to our performance on these 2 goals. For nature provides all the goods and services we produce and consume, and our disconnect with nature is the root cause of many of the societal challenges we face today, including this existential climate crisis. In this regard, although the VNR has not mentioned it, the notion of nature-based solutions should really be emphasized. Now, what are nature-based solutions? It is defined by the IUCN as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. Now, that's quite a mouthful, but really those societal challenges essentially are those that are being addressed by the entire SDG agenda in ultimately leaving no one behind by ensuring fundamentals like food and water security, building resilience to natural disasters and climate change, and of course, protecting human health. In addition, nature-based solutions like forest protection and restoration also enables the capture of carbon dioxide to mitigate climate change, providing also a competitive edge for ensuring green development in Malaysia. So production and consumption need to embrace nature, as do climate action in the country. So I just reiterate the point that Dr. Nagu had made on the nexus between climate change and biodiversity, which is really important. Next, I would like to flag is some concerns that we are observing. One is the measures being undertaken by the government to protect our rich forest space of still more than 50% of the land area under the REDD+ financing framework and other initiatives like EFT, I think, which we heard earlier, and which provide very innovative approaches to draw in the much needed finance, both from the public and private sectors. However, you will all have heard of reports of forest reserves being degazetted in various states recently for mining activities. So really, policy coherence is very much needed to ensure we protect our remaining rich forest cover, and strong policy measures as well as enablers are needed very urgently. And this is where I think maybe bodies like MyCAC can come up with these kind of overarching policy recommendations, and it's really welcome to see the establishment of MyCAC to do this, the space for this to happen. In terms of policy as well, I mean, Dr. Nagu mentioned about what our commitment back in 1992 was with regard to our pledge in the Rio summit to protect, to maintain at least 50% of our land area under forest and tree cover. But this again has been reiterated in many different forms in other documents that have come subsequently. It's only mentioned as forest cover, and the policy has been sort of I guess, vacillating between these two words. So that again, the policy clarity is very important. I know that the recent forest policy has made some mention, but we really need to then define what these words forest and tree cover might ultimately mean. Okay, so policy coherence, policy clarity are very critical. The second issue I would like to raise is the involvement of grassroots community in providing solutions and innovative approaches. Grassroots communities' experiences really need to be captured more comprehensively and inform policymaking moving forward. In the past, I think it's true to say we have generally adopted a very top-down approach to policy making, in the sense that almost like government knows best. But those days are over, and we really need to embrace the new norm in terms of policy making, which is to include everybody, all stakeholders, and be respectful that everybody has a very valid perspective and very valid voice. In the past discussion, I think the views of value of indigenous communities and what they bring to the table was highlighted, and I also reflected in Dr. Nagu's intervention earlier. So we really need to draw all these voices. That's where our strength lies, in coming up with really robust solutions in addressing these very huge problems. However, efforts like that being undertaken, and so efforts like those being undertaken by the APPGM SDG in localizing SDGs at the grassroots level reveals that needs vary across communities and regions, and there is a lot of innovative capacity at local level, given they are really at the forefronts of the impacts of things like climate change and biodiversity loss. Hence, the need to connect bottom-up and top-down approaches cohesively in policymaking is really important to address the lived realities of those most vulnerable and impacted. So important documents like the National Adaptation Plan, which really we are glad to hear just now that Dr. Managu mentioned, is now moving, as it has really been on the cards since the 11th Malaysia Plan. That kind of those things and other policy documents relating to climate should really be co-created with real multi-stakeholder consultations. For example, in designing implementation measures of other climate action, like the implementation of our nationally determined contributions, and also developing the very welcome long-term low carbon development strategy, which he mentioned earlier. So in that context, for example, some of you might know, I think the private sector through Shell has come up with some scenarios, and also happy to announce that WWF, working with Boston Consulting Group, is also working on net zero emissions pathways for Malaysia to offer as inputs into this very important process on determining our long-term strategy. And we look forward to having good strong collaborative engagements with CASA and all other stakeholders in co-creating and jointly developing such a strategy. And in the same way, sustainable production efforts in the country need to take account of how all stakeholders, including grassroots communities, can be empowered to play their part. So the story of Malaysia's journey towards sustainable palm oil production, which has been highlighted in the VNR as a box article, is a good example. As previously, the target set of meeting MSPO full certification by 2020 needed to be revised to get all stakeholders, especially the smallholders, on board. But it's a good story, and it's something that we are glad to see being highlighted. Now, my final point is on the changes that need to really happen that underpin all our decision making. This is, if you'd like, the software that that the operating system really that needs to be redefined and changed. So in that context, we are seeing positive movement. So yesterday, we heard both from Tok Pa in his opening statement about the importance of climate change, as well as the Prime Minister in IGEM about a shift towards ensuring planetary health that the government is adopting. This is really welcome. We've heard also that things like the donut economy, which look more at purpose-driven outcomes rather than merely material growth that's measured by GDP, are things that are also being looked into in developing some of our cities. And Dr. Nagu also mentioned about natural capital accounting. Now, really, these are things that we need to start shifting and addressing to make sure that our operating system can support all the actions that we are undertaking in terms of implementing these SDG goals, because otherwise we will always be in discord the way we measure progress differs from actually what we're trying to achieve on the ground. So purpose-driven economy, impact-driven economy rather than profit-driven really is what we need to shift to. And, even in the national accounts, there have already been very good advancements made by DOSM, who need to be really congratulated as well in their role in advancing SDGs in the country. In the 11th Malaysia Plan midterm review, I think, it was reported that certain accounts, water account and energy accounts have already been developed to be incorporated into our national accounts. So these are things that we hope we can see moving forward, integrated properly, so that this shapes decision making. This helps us really understand the externalities being how they can be integrated into our decision making and assessing how we are really progressing. So my final ending remark is really we need to work together now. I mean, the time for us all to come together and work together in collaboration and cooperation is now. We really need cooperation, collaboration, work ethics, and not work in competition or distrust. With that, I thank you very much. Back to you, Zara.
Thank you very much, Lavanya. If I may, I will try and recap your comments. So you started off with reviewing the VNR process, telling us about how it was a truly multi-stakeholder process with lots of consultation and a lot of trust. And you expressed hope that this can be, this can continue forward in the policies that Dr. Nagu was talking about and that are being developed now, and also policies in the future. And you also, made a call back to that in your future remarks, really an emphasis on the importance of multi-stakeholder consultation. You also talked about how nature should be integrated into all goals, and this is also, something that all the other panelists have been talking about, the importance of not just climate change, but also like nature being a very important part of addressing climate change, and also how nature supports human society, human well-being, and you talked about the importance of nature-based solutions. So for those of you in the audience who maybe missed what Lavanya's definition of nature-based solutions there, they're essentially environmental or natural capital, so natural environmental interventions, we could say, that provide services, provide benefits to society. You also talked about the importance of bringing in the local level of governance and local people, and talked about the innovative capacity that we've seen in APPGM, and talked about the need to connect both the bottom-up and top-down approaches. And you also talked about the net zero pathway that that we're developing independently. So we have seen Shell come up with their own pathway, and we also talked about the work that WWF Malaysia and BCG are doing there. You also, I think, in your last point, talked about the importance, and I think this has come up in a lot of the questions as well, the importance of how we view our economy and how we think about our economy. And maybe even, talking about economy is kind of shows where we're at with that. So you're talking about how we should be looking at a purpose-driven and impact-driven economy. So one that's not just focusing on GDP. You talked about the donut economy. So for those of you who don't know, the donut economy essentially talked about the boundaries. So we want to be above those societal boundaries and ensure that everybody has what they need, is well taken care of, but also that we are within the outer boundaries of the environment, and that we're sitting in that nice little donut there. This actually is a great callback to comments that we heard earlier from Professor Jamal. We talked about the need for beyond GDP indicators and how we are actually measuring our development and our well-being. I hope that adequately sums up what you've been talking about. I think, thank you. I think Rama and Azila, I think we are talking about YB Wong Tek joining us. Is he on the line?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce YB Wong Tek, the MP or Member of Parliament for Bentong. Sorry, we can't hear YB Wong Tek.
Yeah, he's muted, Rama. Okay.
Hello.
Yes,
Hello,
YB,
YB.
we can hear
Yes,
you.
YB, we can hear you.
Sorry, good morning. Zara, good morning, everyone. A bit of problem here. I cannot get connected. I don't have chance to listen to everyone this morning.
Not an issue. You're here now, so wonderful.
All right, I try my best to present what I have. So the chapter on sustainability and climate change, in my opinion, it has covered a broad range of issues and put forth many good ideas and suggestions. But I'd like to express a bit of concern, a few concerns. Even though the report painted a very positive outlook for the nation, that is, I worried a little bit, as though everything is, thing will be okay. Thing will be okay. That is a bit of worry there because we are dealing with a crisis. So I would like to point out that I have concern on whether we have a strong commitment to follow through all the good suggestions and idea that have put forth, and then whether there is strong political will to stand by what we preached. So I'd like to cite a few examples. For example, we have good concern on the sharp rise of hazardous waste in the country. In year 2015, we have 1.9 million tons of, we generate 1.9 million tons of hazardous waste. And in year 2019, increased to 4 million tons. So that is a great concern. But at the same time, we allow, our leadership will allow industry come in to generate, to continue to add on to this figure. For example, liners alone, liners as a company alone have generated more than a million tons of hazardous waste and close to 1 million tons of radioactive waste. And at this moment, piled up at the site, no solution to it. And that, I think, that should be the serious concern on how we move forward in in another issue, another example, water security. That is a serious concern for everybody. We face the challenges. We identified that is a problem, but to date, water catchment are not being gazetted. Water catchment for drinking water are not being gazetted across the country. Project or development like mining activities, like logging, highly polluting industry like paper mill will carry out in water catchment area. And worse, even waste dump of hazardous waste and toxic radioactive waste were proposed in catchment area. So that is the concern, whether we have, even though we have a lot of good idea, whether there is political will to see things through. And then the Asset Genie, another set case that we are looking at. Asset Genie was accorded as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve in 2009. The purpose is to serve as a learning place for sustainable development. Unfortunately, over the last decade, the whole place was torn out. Worst thing is, as we see it, it's a place to learn sustainable development. We fail, we make mistakes, but we didn't learn from it. Destruction continue. That is the very sad thing happen in our country. So that's why I'm seriously concerned out there whether there is political will to make changes for this country. Second thing I look at is the lack of urgency. The lack of urgency. We're talking about an issue of the survival of humanity. As Greta Thunberg said, our house is on fire. We have to take an all-out approach to fight this crisis like a war. But we don't see the urgency out there. So I would like to see, I think this is the time. This is the time that we have to take make very hard decision and take very drastic action. For example, we should, probably make a hard decision, ban logging for the nation immediately. Take immediate action, and then something quite easy to do: gazette punishment for drinking water across the nation. Probably doing things like conserve 1,000 kilometers of coastline planted with bacau, mangrove, and all this. And our forests. We always proud to announce that we have committed to maintain 50% of our land mass covered with forests. In every international forum, we mentioned that we have committed to it since 1992. Even yesterday, our minister, Dr. Sri Mustafa, highlighted again in his opening speech. So why not? We take immediate action, mark out the boundary of this 50% of our forests, identify the acreage, and show it to the world and tell them we have committed, and this is the piece of land still available, still here, and I think that will make the country proud, and that will give us a way and hope to move forward. At this time, I think the country should come to realization we cannot go on business as usual, and a paradigm shift is needed. Let us, instead of focusing on mitigation, regulating, restricting negative impacts on destructive economic activity, we should plan forwards, phasing out an economy based on extraction, exploitation, and destruction, and go all out towards developing a green economy with seriousness, commitment, and determination. Then I think we can. But unfortunately, even though we said that, as I just mentioned, political will, in month of April this year, we have heard announcement by our minister, resource minister, Dato Hamza, that would like to turn Malaysia into a mineral hub, and that is 4.1 trillion worth of mineral deposit in our country. Those are the news and that will upset how the way forward for green economy. Another thing is, I think, as I said, this is all-out war. This is a crisis time. So we want to take a whole nation approach. Everyone, no one left behind. This is the time. No one left. Everyone should contribute. Everyone should be empowered to be a part of this effort to turn the country around, to fight this crisis. I think we have to look at our country. Look at our country as a nation. What are the advantages we have, and identify our competitive advantages and how we can maximize its value and potential. And look, okay, we, Malaysia as a country, we are located near the equator, with sunshine and good rainfall, in a very dynamic environment. Everything grow in very fast rate. Be able to regenerate in a dynamic way. So, and then let's look at all these environmental factors around us, all this potential around us, and create a new path and move forward. I think we have to come out with a new direction that would chart an economy path that towards maximum green growth in this nation. In conclusion, I think without strong political will, with no mass participation and no clean governance, we will not be able to move forward. So I like to believe that to have a clean, to have a healthy, in order to have a healthy society, we must have a healthy environment. With that, I think I just close my message.
Thank you. Thank you very much, YB. So just to reemphasize, I think YB was made a very strong push for urgency of action on dealing with these environmental crises, and that we need very strong political will and a clean government in order to achieve this and to integrate our policies. Unfortunately, we only have a very few minutes. Oh no, I've just been told we have a little bit more time to go to Q&A. I'm very sorry for everybody for taking up so much time, but it was just very interesting comments from our panelists. So I think to start with, perhaps we can. There was a question, raised about the nature-based solutions, which was mentioned by Ms. Lavanya. And perhaps that's a question that Dr. Nagu can take. The question is about nature-based solutions providing a higher return on investment with multiple benefits, but do we have the institutional framework to implement it? And then there's a, saying that we have historical issue of government agencies working in silo with separate mandates and KPIs, and then again, this was a thread that's been running through our talk this morning. So how can we mainstream nature-based solutions?
All right. I don't know whether Lavanya would like to go first or well, I'll just take it. I mean, nature-based solution, many organizations have given a different definition to it. We are quite cautious in using this approach because in a one dimension, with this whole carbon offset move towards reducing carbon, and many countries, as you know, developed countries have put pledge towards being carbon neutral by 2050. What we are worried is their interpretation is come here to Malaysia, try to protect a piece of forest and get carbon credits, and there they go reducing their carbon emission in another area without actual action on their part. So that's something that we have to be very careful of. But carbon, I do agree with Lavanya and everybody else, nature-based solution has a potent power if it's done properly to address both biodiversity loss and climate change. And in Malaysian context, I think we have been doing it through our sustainable forest management, through our ecosystem-based approaches. And I do agree with YB Wong Tak, probably that needs to be mainstream. And this is something that ever since independence, we have been talking about in every webinar, the federal state dichotomy over environment. So it's such a fragile issue. I mean, YB Wong Tak said ban logging. I mean, it sounds so simple, ban logging, but we might need to understand that the federal constitution, for every 10 ringgit Malaysia gets, 9 ringgit goes to the federal coffers, only 1 ringgit go to the states. So what do state governments do? So we need to understand that. That's why I think the nature-based solution, if it's done properly, if we can put a value to ecosystem services, then there will be economic benefit. For example, people are extracting mineral water. And you and me know mineral water in Malaysia is more expensive than petrol. But from where they're extracting the mineral water, if that particular company pays something called payment for ecosystem services, the state gets money. So this kind of things need to be more mainstream in looking at putting a value to nature. And there are many other areas that we can actually look at. And the rakyat must be willing to play. As we know, the fruit that we all love, durian will never be there without the pollinators, and the pollinators will not be there without the mangrove forest. So if we put a price for all these services that nature is giving us, many of our utility, even water, for example, Malaysia is one of the cheapest, but we start putting a value for the need to get fresh water, then I think states will be incentivized to keep forests and to keep land use. But this, and I know we've been speaking about this for quite some time, but I think we need to move towards more action. And of course, we need to have a plan to start putting value for nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nagu. I think maybe to follow up on that question, there's actually another question which asks, what's the point of having other types of indicators that include environment and biodiversity than GDP if addressing environmental externalities are not embedded in policy and regulatory framework? I feel like you have answered a little bit of that already in your answer. Would you just like to expand a little bit more?
Right. I think that's a really good question. And I think what's really important is, as I said in the 11th Malaysia Plan had sowed the seeds to look at nature-based accounting. And I think we need to move that a bit more in the 12th Malaysia Plan. And I think what needs to take center stage in the 3P, the people, profit, and planet, is all these three given the equal emphasis. And maybe a new instrument to measure growth. I gave an example of the Inclusive Wealth Index, but maybe there are better. I'm not an economist, but there might be other instruments. And this is an opportune time. I mean, unfortunately, this pandemic had to come and hit us, but it's a really huge wake-up call for us to redefine development. And I think Malaysia, with Economic Planning Unit and Ministry of Finance, can take a forefront in this region to redefine development priorities, because we all know, even if you have the economic power these days, that the virus cripples you to stay at home. So I think this is something that really needs to take center stage, and we need to discuss now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nagu. I think I'd like to go over to, this might be Puan Norliza or YB Wongtek. How do cities and municipal councils influence local residents to view climate change as a serious crisis? So, Puan Norliza, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Zara. I think first and foremost, a lot of the occurrences of climate change hazards in cities are not really well explained to the community. They don't look at urban floods, whatever that's happening. For example, a landslide, that's happening, or a long-term disruption of water. They're not being explained as something that's related to the climate change. So I think first and foremost, I think that language, that understanding, that awareness needs to be shared by the communities. And because local governments are most of the time at the forefront of actually addressing any form of rescue works or any kind of cleaning up works, I think that's where there must be that understanding or sharing of information clearly with the communities on what is happening and why it's happening. And I think bringing in the climate change language to a much more localized level is very important. So I think every time there's something, especially when you're developing some form of a action plan or a mitigation or adaptation plan, I think it needs to be translated to as layman as possible. And we find that the current blueprints are very high level. Even the ones done for city levels, I find that, like for example, Kuala Lumpur have a resilient document. It's still quite high level in terms of how it's being translated and also the language that we use to write these documents. So that's the way forward. I would say one of the way is how do we bring that more local level.
Thank you. YB Wongtek, have you perhaps done anything in your constituency, or is there anything you?
Yeah, I think SDG, climate change, as this kind of term is very alien in most of the local administration, even in business leader, community leader. I think only as our minister point out yesterday. Many people still asking, even probably among our leadership, still very not familiar with the term of SDG and the issue of climate change and not pay attention to it. In the local level, I think it's quite, this kind of word is quite alien to them. So that is the biggest problem we are facing now. I think all this discussion in a very high level, but the problem is affecting the people, and the people have to come together to solve the problem. But we are not get people involved at this time. That is a concern. Yeah.
Thank you, YB. Okay, I think we perhaps this is a slightly different question, and it again goes to the integration of the goals. This is from Amna Suni Ong, and I'd like to pose it to Dr. Nagu, if that's possible. So she is asking, she's saying that gender has been adopted as an important component of the climate change discourse. What has the government's implementation to its commitment in this regard, including gender composition of party delegations, meetings, gender climate change focal points in ministries, and full, meaningful, and equal participation and leadership of women in all aspects of local level climate policy and action?
Thank you for this question. Also, gender mainstreaming in the ministry is quite fairly balanced. Frank, I'm happy to say that our climate change division is headed by a woman, a very able woman. And going to the Conference of Parties, we have equal representation of men and women attending these meetings. So I think gender mainstreaming, at least in the government sector, in the environment sector, I will say we probably have more women than men. In fact, the DG of Environment, the Director General of the Department of Environment is also a woman. The Deputy Director General is also a woman. So I think that's quite taken into account quite well. So I think this concerns, at least for the Malaysian context in the environment sector, I think it's well addressed, and we have got good mainstreaming of gender in these meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nagu. There is a question here from Andrew Koo, and I was thinking, I don't know, Lavanya might want to take it. Would any member of the panel want to comment how kicking out durian farmers from Raub in Pahang and the cutting down of a reported 15,000 durian trees promotes the SDGs?
Sorry, Zara, what was the question?
It's about the durian farmers in Raub in Pahang. So Andrew Koo is asking.
Okay, maybe YB Wong Tat might be better placed to answer that one.
Okay,
You go ahead first.
Okay. All right. Sorry. What was the question again? Sorry.
It's about promoting the SDGs, and I think Andrew is just having an issue here, trying to understand how kicking out durian farmers from Raub in Pahang and cutting down 15,000 durian trees promotes the SDGs.
I don't know either, right? I don't know how that promotes SDGs. Obviously, I mean, there are many issues that come into play there, right? The lack of consultation, which is what I was saying is fundamental to the implementation of SDGs. But maybe, Zara, if I can take my space here now to address that question on natural capital, nature-based solutions, which Dr. Nagu had already touched on. In terms of mainstreaming, I really hope that our 12th Malaysia plan, which we have heard many times, will have a more integrated approach towards implementing SDGs. And that's our sort of plan forward in terms of SDG implementation in the country. And it's given that it's going to be more integrated, I hope there would be a strategy on nature-based solutions, because nature-based solutions, as Dr. Nagu has already mentioned, cuts across. It supports action on climate change. It also supports action to protect our very valuable biodiversity, which your image, Zara, showed is an even bigger wave of the tsunami that it's looming in the future, in the very near future, I would say. But on top of that, it also, as I mentioned earlier, addresses a lot of other societal issues, societal challenges, food security, water security. I mean, YB Wong Tat also has mentioned about, protecting our water catchment areas and all the action that is not really happening in that area. Puan Nurliza talked about, what kind of securities we need in the cities as well, which are also reliant on the services the ecosystems provide. So really, I hope our 12th Malaysia plan will have a strategy on nature-based solutions for all these cross-cutting reasons. Now, in terms of carbon credits, I agree with Dr. Nagu. We shouldn't be supporting dirty industries continuing in countries outside abroad by selling our carbon, right? But that shouldn't be the reason for us not to adopt and define nature-based solutions for our needs, which is very broad and very and in that context, I think KETSA is actually doing a pretty good job with defining the REDD+ financing framework, stipulating that any forest carbon credit is recommended to be traded domestically only, so it's not going to go outside the country. And there are certain mechanisms, I believe, that are being worked out. So there is already cognizance of the danger of nature-based solutions being usurped to continue allowing dirty industries to function abroad, but at the same time, that's the way forward. We cannot sort of throw the baby with the bathwater out, sort of just color nature-based solutions by that one important issue, but nevertheless one issue. We need to define it for ourselves. And in terms of the other important point that Dr. Nagu raised in terms of tax, tax allocation and the constitutional structure, very important point. And that's why the EFT, the ecological fiscal transfer, for example, is a good mechanism which has been introduced by the Ministry of Finance recently in the last budget and in the 2019 budget. To motivate states to keep their forest cover. And I think, if you look at it, it makes a lot of sense, right? When disasters happen because forests are not being looked after, for example, we constantly hear of flooding events in Kelantan and so on. The cost of rehabilitation is actually borne by the federal coffers, by taxpayers' money. So think of it as an investment when you give money to states to look after their forests upfront. Prevention rather than cure should be the mantra, right? So I think these are the kind of elements I hope will be put into building a strategy for nature-based solutions, which I hope will strongly come out in the 12th Malaysia Plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lavanya. Unfortunately, we will have to wrap up now. I don't know, every panelist, maybe like a very short 1 to 2 sentence intervention, and then I will try and wrap up. So Dr. Nagu, please.
Yeah, thank you, Zara. It's really been a great pleasure to be with this esteemed group of panelists. Learned a lot myself. My quick last points is, I think we need to bring the equation in the 12th Malaysia Plan for planetary health to be more mainstream, because we realize that planetary health impacts us. This pandemic was a great teacher and is still teaching us. And I think this mantra that conservation is also development needs to be understood by everybody. And this links to many of my earlier points that nature, protecting nature, ecosystem services has got a huge value. I mean, there's a paper published that nature provides US $148 trillion every year, and nobody accounts for it. In Malaysia, we really do not know, right? So that's very, very important. And I think I'll be quick. I had a few more points, but very quick. One final point is, environment, unfortunately, is not everybody's priority, but environment affects everybody's priority. With that, thank you all very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nagu. Puan Raliza?
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Zara. Yeah, I think it has been a really enjoyable discussion. A lot of new things that even I myself are listening to. I think it's very important now that we are already, very committed to the SDG goals, especially now with the government having committed to every 4 years we are reporting on the SDGs. It's actually good if we could plan ahead for this SDG reporting in a more structured manner. As I mentioned, what we hear from the panelists are things that are also not found very much on the report. And so we like to see more of that being reported, because as we also attend some of these sessions, we listen of other countries that are also sharing their good work. So I think we also want to reflect that. Of course, at the same time, we also want to move forward and even ensure that the goals and targets that has been, that we are committed to actually deliver goes all the way down to the local ground. And I think this is again, policy integration at the national level is so important. We have many policies that are not well aligned, very conflicting as when we speak about environment, climate change. There are probably many policies that we really need to put on the red box or the green box, to try to establish whether or not they are in conflict or they are in alignment. And if that is not done, the localization efforts are even more crucial, because people will just get more confused at the local level. So I think we have a big job actually in moving forward, and I'm really glad we've committed to a second report that shows our commitment. So moving forward, definitely we will get more support from the ground. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nolita. Lavanya? Final comments, 1 to 2 sentences.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess what I'd like to say is emphasize again on multi-stakeholder collaboration, multi-stakeholder involvement and partnerships in addressing these issues, because they are big and everybody has something to bring to the table. So let us be respectful of that and actually continue the good momentum that this process has initiated. In moving forward, I do believe that this is the way forward, where everybody joins hands together to work together towards a common purpose, towards a common goal. And that we can see in inspiring initiatives that have already burgeoned in the country, like the APPGM on SDGs, where you have MPs from different parties sitting together and wanting to address fundamental issues like SDGs. So with that, I would just like to end and say we should collaborate, cooperate, and enough of competition.
Thank you so much, Lavanya. Finally, and definitely not least, YB Wongtek, can we have your last sentences, please?
We are at the time of hardship. The country is facing a lot of problems with the pandemic going on. I realize when this sort of thing happen, when hardship is around, and a lot of time the issue of environment will be neglected and sidelined, and environment will be sacrificed. I think most of the activities stop during time of pandemic, but you can see blogging, mining, legal or illegal continue. So that is something that we are very concerned. Another thing that I like to everyone to think hard is we don't know how long to get out of this pandemic, but then we know it will strike again in near future. So we must put serious effort to understand the relationship between pandemic and environment, particularly how we produce our food. So I hope in this hard time we continue to look at the issue that keep the survival of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wongtek, and thank you very much, panelists. I think I don't need to wrap up because everybody has said everything that's been covered. So I will hand over. Thank you so much for your patience, Mr. Sharizan.
No worries at all. Thank you so much, Zara, for moderating this session. Thank you to all our panelists, Puan Norliza, Ms. Lavanya, and YB. Tuan Wong Tak, and also Dr. K. Nagulendran for coming, for joining us in this session of sustainability and climate change. Many takeaway points actually, but I think one thing about what YB said was awareness more of the SDG with the MPs as well, because we need more MPs to come on board. If they come on board, they understand the urgency. I think a lot of things will be moving forward and very, very quickly as well. So we pray for that, more on the MP levels to understand the SDG and to be aware of the SDG as well. So thank you so much to all our panelists as well. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions at all, you can post it into our chat box, our Q&A box in Zoom. If you're in Zoom or if you're in Facebook, you need to just send us via the chat box as well. We will try to get to your questions as best as we can, but unfortunately time is not on our side as well, as we will have to move into our next segment right now, which is called strengthening. We are going into, I think, everyone's favorite, governance, social cohesion, and partnership as well. And to tell you more about this, gives me great pleasure to hand the microphone over to our Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance co-chair and senior fellow MASA, very popular guy indeed. Let's give it up for Professor Dato Dr. Denison Jayasuriya.
Okay, thank you, MC, and thank you for the earlier panel. I know environment is a hot topic, not just because of the weather, but also because of the issues and the overall neglect. We now move into our final session. I'm conscious that today is Friday, and I think we have agreed to hold on till about 1 o'clock. So this session is slightly less than the time allocated, but we'll try and manage it in that way. This is on chapter 6 of the VNR report. Civil society has benchmark SDG 6 as in many ways a difficult SDG to fulfill because of the non-discrimination element on access to justice, reduction on corruption, inclusive participation, and so forth. And SDG 17 has had a lot of progress in terms of Malaysia's role overseas as well as locally in the partnerships, the multi-stakeholder engagements. Once again, we have a good panel, and I would request all the speakers to on their cameras, so at least I know you are around. Yes, yes, Prof. Yeah, all four are available, and I see all of us still smiling in this final session, and we will focus, as in the earlier panels, views from government representatives, parliamentarian, civil society, and think tank. And let's start immediately. And if you have specific questions on SDG 16 or SDG 17, some say both these SDGs should be foundation to all of the others. I know in all the sessions, what was highlighted was the cross-cutting nature. But let me invite Inche Baidil bin Ghazali, the Director of Security and Public Order Division at the Economic Planning Unit to share the views from EPU and the government. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Prof. Datuk Dr. Denison. Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera, our distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to share the insights on the SDG, particularly on the VNR. We can have a snapshot on chapter 6, which focus on SDG 16 and SDG 17 on governance, social cohesion, and partnerships. We will look at the current progress, issues, and challenges. And lastly, our way forward for both goals. As reported in the VNR 2021, where are we now under Goal 16? Key indicators for social cohesion and safety are shown in the table under Chapter 6. It is related to homicide cases, victims of domestic violence cases, crime perception index, and etc. There's up and down on this. Malaysia also participates in United Nations peacekeeping operations, ranking 25th out of 126 troop contributing countries. Next, the right to justice. Legal aid is granted for every person in Malaysia. This is embodied under Article 5 in the Constitution. With regard to battle against corruption, the government continues to focus on combating corruption in pursuit to become a corrupt-free nation. There are increasing number of investigation papers and numbers of arrests, reflecting the effective efforts by government. Talking about strong institutions and good governance, series of reforms directed at institutions, either government or corporates, led by GICC. The government also aims to improve public satisfaction in service delivery. The percentage of complaint resolved has been above 90%. With regard to the freedom of information, we have yet to fully embrace the principle. However, in line with the open data policy and cloud computing under MAMPU, public has greater access to public sector information now. Next slide. Well, moving to the next slide. What are our issues and challenges? Among others, gender disparities still remain, particularly related to gender-based violence and sexual abuse. We still have challenges in ensuring women's equal opportunities at all levels in political, economic, and public life. This has been evidenced by the fact that only 14.1% of women are represented in the parliament. Touching on access to justice and getting legal aid, challenges are due to the physical access constraint and lack of equitable access due to high legal fees and poor legal literacy. In the context of implementing good governance, service delivery are quite in a complex environment. We have federal, we have state and local government, and various ministries and agencies with their own power and authority in the legislation. We're also facing significant challenges in corruption at all levels. Next slide, please. On our way forward, National Unity Blueprint has been developed to strengthen national unity and social cohesion. It is a renewed commitment by government to foster ethnic harmony. Implementation of this blueprint on ground should be appreciated to address the national unity. With regard to gender issues on violence and rights, there are specific policies and instruments need to be explored, such as educating the opposite gender, enhancing women empowerment, and providing opportunity for women. Increased efforts to advocate women's rights and breaking male-dominated areas to increase chances for women to participate in decision-making. In regard of justice for all, some of the recommendations are to focus on increasing the access of legal aid. Financial issue will be addressed and legal aid acts will be strengthened. And further expansion of mobile courts will enable access to those in the rural areas. Next, public access to information will also be improved through the ongoing efforts in open data. We also need to explore legislation to promote freedom of information. Malaysian journalists and civil society have even proposed the establishment of an independent media council to create media self-regulation with the aim to uphold and promote media freedom. is through a legislative and regulatory environment which is conducive for that purpose. In relation to good governance, firstly, in battling corruption, we need to continue the implementation of National Anti-Corruption Initiative, especially in 6 priority areas, that is political governance, public sector administration, public procurement, legal and judicial, law enforcement, and corporate governance. We also introduce anti-bribery management system and an effective corruption risk management to enhance the existing control mechanisms. Other than that, is developing organization anti-corruption plan. Secondly, in ensuring good governance, the government also has established National Anti-Financial Crime Center to curb illicit financial flows. This is related to corruption issues, terrorism, and other illegal activities. Government also planning to introduce on beneficial ownership to enhance transparency. Law will be required for those who benefit from project to disclose their beneficiary ownership. Okay, next slide, please. Next, I would like to speak on SDG 17, that is partnership for the goals. First, on the current status and progress of SDG 17. In terms of global partnership, Malaysia is a strong proponent of North-South and South-South cooperation. We have MTCP program or Malaysian Technical Cooperation Program at the international level. Next, the domestic partnership. The National SDG Roadmap, among others, aims to inform and encourage all stakeholders to align with and participate in this collective journey towards more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive development. Towards a whole nation approach, the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance was established as a network of CSOs committed to adopt the SDG framework. They play a role in creating awareness as well as advocate and monitor policies and programs. Meanwhile, all party parliamentary group, that is APPGM, is an innovative model where CSOs, academic and experts collaborate with parliamentarians to localize the SDGs. And lastly, at domestic level, UN Global Compact has also played a role to build a strong network across the private sector. Looking at issues and challenges, yes, funding is still a challenge. Country needs to balance the domestic expenditure while continue to provide funding for technical development. Moreover, there's no single coordinates the development assistance funded by Malaysia globally. We have also challenged in terms of priorities of the federal and state government, and also overlapping roles across implementing agencies, which affect the SDG implementation. Lastly, the availability of data is also crucial for SDG implementation. Now we have disaggregated data across demography. So the recommendation is first is to explore ways to strengthen MTCP for inclusive development assistance for the South-South cooperation, and to leverage the existing international cooperation platform, such as JICA, Colombo Plan, German International Cooperation Agency. And secondly is to ensure policy coherence in SDG implementation by aligning to SDG roadmap. Thirdly is to localize SDG by involving district office to enhance the role of all agencies, including CSOs, academia, and private sectors in addressing SDG at the grassroots level. Fourth is to enhance the participation of CSOs in the localization of SDGs through the creation of enabling policies, effective coordination, capacity building and funding. Fifth is the SDG Council and NSC to make regularly, monitor the delivery during the 12-month period. And lastly, most important also, is collecting a more comprehensive and aggregated data. This is to be undertaken by State Malaysia. With that, thank you for having me, and over to you, Prof. Datuk Moderator.
Okay, terima kasih. Very comprehensive presentation on SDG 16, including the issues and the way forward, as well as on SDG 17. Mungkin in the discussions, you could continue to highlight any further plans on the district level, localizing, the enabling policies. Yesterday, Dr. Zunika also highlighted strengthening the collaboration as an ongoing process. So maybe afterwards, even if there is no questions, that is my thought for you, lah. So you can see how to strengthen, whether that is included stronger in the 12th Malaysia Plan. Now, let me invite YB Puan Maria Chin Abdullah, who is the Member of Parliament for Petaling Jaya and also the Deputy Chair of the APP-GM SDG for her views on SDG 16 and SDG 17. YB, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I will try to make it within the 10 minutes that's allocated. Just before that, maybe I saw the slide wrongly, Mr. Baidule, regarding the legal status of the legal aid. Maybe you can clarify it later. I think I saw that it was in the Constitution, but maybe I saw it wrongly. So I just want to start that when we actually talk of peace, justice, and strong institutions under the SDG 17 and also 16 in relation to governance, we really need to be truth to ourselves and to take stock, of the weaknesses and the inequalities, because that is the whole purpose of why we are assessing the SDGs and how it can actually bring about growth and prosperity to our nation. Definitely the COVID-19 pandemic has indeed perpetuated and even exacerbated existing inequalities and put most at risk. So now you're turning M40s who are in the middle income falling to poverty line due to loss of jobs and also their own businesses, and the poor falling even deeper into poverty and hopelessness, to be honest. And it's worrying. Yes, we have a nice VNR report, but still we have very challenging issues that we need to deal with. There's still the unresolved corruption cases. I'm not talking about the small catching the small fishes, but the big ones that we still need to resolve and make our MACC much more strengthened, to deal with the corruption cases. The other one is really we are still faced with the race, religion, and political patronage that are still being raised, for political expediency, even during trying times like this. Research has also shown that, the Education Ministry said that 36.9% of our students nationwide do not possess any electronic devices to allow them to study online. While we are looking towards September to open schools, but we have a year and a half where we have a lost generation of young people who actually missed out on studies And yet, inadequate efforts have been made to resolve that education system. The desecration of the rule of law. To start off with, we don't have a parliament, we are under emergency, and it leaves our country bare without any check and balances. Yeah, the structural reforms that we talked about have actually now taken a backseat in terms of trying to strengthen the institutional and regulatory frameworks. And efforts to curb media freedom. This is what we are seeing. Suppress reports on the death in custody, freedom of assembly are actually being curbed. And these are actually quite chilling, has a chilling effect on our society. So these are the peace and security justice issues that needs serious commitment from our political leadership. It is not just about policies, but actually clear, people-oriented implementation that really reflects the ground realities. That's what we need to see. So while we talk about strong institution, it has to be people-oriented, people's participation, so that we can achieve that SDG 16. Stronger institution must begin with targeted bottoms-up approach. And this approach has been tested and claimed, and I must say, has been quite successful under the APPGM on SDGs. We have strongly encouraged that project solutions at Parliament constituencies need to be inclusive of as many stakeholders as possible, including grassroots, including ministries, civil society, academicians, and whoever who are brought to the table to sit together to work out the solutions. This we have to actually implement, because that actually helps to empower people and our structures to actually bring about this SDG 16 and 17. And I cannot emphasize more that people's participation, for example, if we just take creating livable housing for all, including especially for the poor, we have to actually understand that we need to give them the dignity, the right to actually own houses. So for me, it is actually reduce, if not no more, public housing, and hope that, because our perspective is that public housing is actually transient. Well, to be honest, it hasn't worked. Let's face it, because people's needs were actually not taken into account when we talked about all these PPR flats. The Housing Ministry and other related institutions, I really urge you to really understand that ownership not only gives people the dignity, but also the stability, and also instill upon them that sense of responsibility to be able to actually take charge, to have a livable, peaceful lives and houses, of course. This strong institution, I heard many speakers talk that there has to be partnership, interconnectedness. That's very important. But the stakeholders are the most important people that needs to be included, which is not just about the civil society or the agencies, but the people who are most affected on the ground, who actually live through the realities on a daily basis. These are the people who will make a difference. And we have to make these people's participation, agencies and people, as part of the universal human rights solution, which will be, of course, supported with evidence-based and rights-based solutions, that can actually help reshape our narrative, our thinking, and our actions on policy making. Because if we want democratic governance, rule of law, stronger institutions, to me, that's the way to go. Peace and justice also means tackling efforts to end violence, which I'm quite glad to hear from EPU, that this is one of the goals. To also end human rights violations and inequalities and corruption, and reduce the present shrinking democratic spaces. These are the challenges. It means ending repressive laws like Detention Without Trial, Sedition Act, SOSMA, bringing in the much needed prison reforms, because it's actually to end the loss of prisoners' lives that we hear so often. To implement the IPCMC, Independent Police Complaints of Misconduct Commission Act, which actually was tabled in 2019. This is actually really to bring back integrity, a stronger institution, and to stop political persecution. This is the time now, when we are actually trying to move forward, whether with or within this pandemic. This is the time to build bridges and not to be divisive and repressive. There are also these various bills on the table: Racial and Religious Hate Crimes Bill, National Harmony and Reconciliation Bill, the National Harmony and Reconciliation Commission Bill. These are the bills that will actually need to be reviewed and create narrative solutions to actually talk about peace and harmony in our multiracial society. So I really hope that, these bills will be brought back for discussion, at least the minimum that we can do, justice to our people. The inclusion of the needs of migrants, refugees, and other vulnerable communities must also be part of the solution and not seen as the problem. Violence against the vulnerables have to stop. There's no two ways about this. We need immediate actions to stabilize people's lives. People are dying by 100 a day, and that is shocking enough. So the structural reforms that we want to bring, long-term and also short-term, is not about giving fishing rod. It's about giving fishing rod to the people and not about giving fishes only. MPs have actually raised about implementing a social safety net for all to be in place, to actually help to strengthen also the institutions, particularly those looking into social welfare, labor, and so forth, to include in food and non-food items such as health, housing, transport, that will actually restore the self-respect to the rakyat and cushion off, so that they are more ready to when any social and economic shock happens again during times of crisis, particularly for the poor. We need a leadership. We need a leadership very badly now, with a deep sense of commitment to the people's crying needs, and a courageous leadership that can stir our nation towards peace and justice and more sustainable living regardless of politics. Let us rise above that. And one last word is really about the women, who actually form 50%, if not more, of our population. They face the greater challenges, and I'm glad that it's being included into the SDG goals. But we have to create a conducive environment for them so that they are able to adapt to the pandemic, to climate disruptions, to not being even able to get the best from the digital revolution. That climate is still lacking. Making up not 50%, if not more, of the population means that women needs to be part of the solution of the socio-economic recovery to move forward towards peace and justice. And it cannot be business as usual anymore, really. We have to think out of the box. We have to include people. We have to talk to each other across institutions, across NGOs, across people who face these lived realities. The institutions, stakeholders have to work towards enhancing people's participation and integrate the principles of equality and non-discrimination as part of their efforts to protect all rights and bring about peace and justice to Malaysia and good governance as well. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, YB Maria, for raising a number of critical issues, as well as re-emphasizing institutional and structural reforms that are needed and which are part of the SDG framework, especially SDG 16. Let me pass the time on to Mr. Anthony Tan, who is in the Secretariat of the APPGM SDG, but here he's representing the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance in bringing CSO voice to the discussion. Anthony, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dennison, and ladies and gentlemen, my presentation is based on a 37-page report. I'm not going to use 37 pages though. It's titled Submission to Malaysia's Second Voluntary National Review on the Sustainable Development Goals 2021, prepared by the APPGM SDG Secretariat and the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance. It was published in May 2021. And the report is available on the KSI website. Chapter 6 of this document covers governance, social cohesion, and partnership, which encompasses both SDG 16 and 17. So SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, is taken from pages 29 to 31 of the submission. I'll begin with the progress and achievements. Firstly, public access to information and fundamental freedom protection, establishment of open data initiatives at the federal level and open government data rights with discretion of individual ministries. Secondly, reduction of all forms of violence and related death rates, community mediation and inter-religious mediation services by the Department of National Unity and Integration to make mediation as an alternative dispute resolution. Thirdly, non-discriminatory laws and policies for sustainable development, including achievement of gender parity in education, amendment to several legislation such as Penal Code, Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act 2007, Domestic Violence Act 1994, and Employment Act of 1955. Adoption of the National Women's Policy and Action Plan 2009 to 2015. Fourth, promoting rule of law and equal access to all. Ratification of treaties including UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People or UNDRIP. Fifth, participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance, alignment of SDGs, key elements in the 11th Malaysia Plan 2016-2020 to strengthen public sector institutions. Now I'd like to go into the gaps and challenges. Number one, public access to information and freedom, fundamental freedom. The OSA continues to be the main challenge to freedom of information. The OSA breeds a culture of secrecy in the civil service since they are unsure about the future of the practice of information management and disclosure. Current access to information for indigenous peoples' needs is often left behind. Number two, institutional capacities and complexities. The operation of institutions at sub-national level suffers from over-centralization of decision-making power at federal level. Furthermore, public participation at local government level remains low. Third, corruption and bribery. There is still a lack of strategic mechanism to expose executive and civil servants to good governance. Fourth, discrimination and harassment under human rights. Some policymakers and legislators in Malaysia lack understanding of universal human rights values and norms and fail to address the needs of migrants, refugees, and victims of trafficking. There is still no safe migration law and policy on migrants, which makes these groups more vulnerable with no access to justice, protection, healthcare, proper jobs, and risk being abused by employers. Fifth, violence and death-related cases. There is a need to communicate about violence, especially in our private sphere. In Malaysia, the LGBT community, especially the transgender, is being targeted and abused. Sixth, upholding the rule of law. The amendments to the Legal Aid Act 1971 expressively preclude non-Malaysians from having access to legal aid services. Furthermore, legal aid assistance programs do not specifically focus on women's rights nor take into account the specific vulnerabilities of women from marginalized communities. Draconian laws continue to be used. A Swaram report indicated that human rights defenders and media are being targeted and forced into silence if they are critical of the government. Finally, I go into the recommendations for SDG 16. Firstly, moving towards an economic model that is more progressive and systematic, that integrates economic, social, and environmental factors, creating shared economy, and also grow in harmony with the environment and nature. Secondly, establish an oversight committee or similar body to reform weak institutions whose main purpose was to gain the people's loyalty to the government and change them into economic enterprises which provide good economic life to the participants. Third, urgently implement data collection and reporting system at the local level that is standardized and aligned to the SDG targets and indicators. Voluntary local reviews should be integrated with national reviews based on the UNESCO Asia Pacific Regional Guidelines on VLRs. Intensify meaningful and genuine multi-party decision-making among the local authorities, assemblymen, NGOs, communities, businesses, and academia. Fifth, conduct intensive capacity building at the local level for achieving meaningful local-based sustainable development on the way to achieving national goals. Six, to amend paragraphs B and C of Part 111 of the Federal Constitution to ensure that a mother of a child born overseas has a right to automatically transmit her citizenship to the child. 7, repeal all national and state laws and policies that discriminate, especially on cultural and spiritual customs and practices. And number 8, revise the national registration policy that currently doesn't recognize cultural marriages nor traditional village home-based delivery of newborns, which ends up rendering even more persons born in our country into a situation of statelessness. Now I'd like to go into SDG 17, which is partnerships for the goals, and this is taken from page 32 of the submission. On SDG 17, the key focus was to strengthen partnerships with faith-based organizations, civil society organizations, private sector, government agencies, and local stakeholders in localizing SDGs at the state, district, and neighborhoods. Progress and achievements. The government of Malaysia has recognized the contribution of the civil society organizations in strengthening the delivery of SDGs. The formation of the all-party parliamentary groups on SDGs, which was approved by the Parliament of Malaysia in October 2019, was the result of the collaborative work begun with the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance. Now, gaps and challenges. One, localizing the SDGs to leave no one behind is a continuous challenge at the grassroots level. Secondly, government programs and assistance are still not reaching the actual target group, especially the vulnerable and the minority groups. Now we come to the recommendations. Move forward policies and institutional coherence, deepen dialogue, network building and partnerships, data-based decision-making and monitoring system. Secondly, conduct capacity building for various stakeholders, including faith-based, non-governmental, and civil society organizations towards localizing SDG 2030. Third, conduct interfaith engagement to mobilize religious leaders to address human trafficking and climate change. Fourth, embrace multi-stakeholder partnerships where government and civil society organizations join hands to end modern slavery. Fifth, discuss disability issues via multi-stakeholder engagement between government, NGO, and private sector in line with the spirit of inclusion. And finally, implement better monitoring system and scrutinize the role of local authorities. For example, some local authorities have free buses and vans, but these services are not reaching the marginalized and the people with disability. A final point I wish to comment is regarding the current setup used by EPU of grouping the 17 SDGs into 6 working committees. I strongly recommend EPU to consider strengthening the synergy of SDG 16 and 17 by moving these 2 SDGs from the well-being and economic growth working committees respectively and shifting them into a new working committee specifically for peace and partnership. I thank you for this opportunity to share our CSO experience with this forum.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for many points that you have raised, the kind of analysis that you have brought in, drawing from the various submissions of civil society in the document and submission. I think what is definitely emerging in the points that were raised, and maybe EPU might want to respond. YB Maria raised on the area of migrants and their access to legal aid and so forth. Anthony has raised on undocumented SDG 16.9, legal identity and the various issues, as well as re-looking at the working group ongoing. I think many good issues were highlighted already by the panel, but there are so many other areas to work at, and I think it's significant. I know time is passing on, but I'm very happy to welcome Professor Dr. Ahmad Murad, Professor at ISTEC, IIUM, and also a Senior Fellow of MASA. Professor, over to you for your 10 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Dennison. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to everybody. And thank you for the invitation, for allowing me to share my views on the VNR. But going back to Dr. Dennison's earlier comment that SDG 16 especially is a difficult area to address. There are many contentious issues, and one of the things which I want to project is the notion of the narrative of the nation, because many of the SDGs are founded on a certain narrative of how nationhood and nation building ought to be. This involves values, sentiments, language, ethnicity, a whole lot of baggage with regard to our identity and the past. And what we see now over the last 20 years especially is a nation that has a narrative that is in disarray, I would say. I have to be cautious here, and I would not elaborate more, but to begin with, due to the emergence of the internet and freedom of expression, and people have blogs and people can express themselves, there are many narratives, and these narratives are contested, they are not aligned, they contradict, and there are many histories. And you find this many histories of the nation emerging, especially from the early 2000s. Many people write, they've expressed themselves in many forms, and history has been, in a way, ethnicized and also regionalized in terms of, we look at Sabah and Sarawak, they want to have their perspective on the history of the nation. Also, in the peninsula, different regions would have different ways of looking at the nation, looking at the past of the nation, looking at the history of the nation, looking at how the nation is to be. So what I've done is I want to walk through some of the areas. I've identified 5 areas that I'll go through by not being exhaustive in my deliberation. And these areas involve media and language, mainly media and language. I've been involved in the media and language at the institutional level, especially over the last 2 decades. I'm a co-author of the submission for Malaysian Media Council in 2002. Perhaps I'll begin with that in terms of what I've been doing, and been working on media self-regulation since then. One is, as mentioned by a number of us, as mentioned in the report, the need for a press or media council in Malaysia. Now, the heydays of the media council was in the 60s and 70s. Many countries have implemented the media council, but they have failed, or it is not a perfect institution. In Britain, for example, we have the public complaints, press complaints commission, but that has not worked well. But the ones that have been working quite effective would be in India and in Australia and some other countries. In America, they perhaps have 1 or 2 media councils at the state level. But in Malaysia, I think the thing is we need to address the regulation of journalists and journalism. We need to have quality reportage. It's not only news, but also editorials and opinions. What we have been advocating for, and I know that there have been consultations in 2002, 2008, 2019, and now the ministry has taken over, have co-opted on the working of legislation for a media council. This is by an act of parliament. It is not a voluntary media council. It cannot work. It has not worked in many countries, and I don't think it will work in Malaysia. So the idea here is to reform the media. By media, I mean the journalistic media. Early on, before digitization, we're talking about newspapers and periodicals, and we're talking about radio and television. But here we are talking about essentially online. Of course, newspapers and periodicals are included. Radio and TV are included, but again, this can be debated. Some would specialize on the print media. Some would specialize on the radio and television. In Indonesia, there are 2 separate regulatory bodies. There's a broadcasting commission. There's another one for the print media. But we can work out on this. So the Malaysian Media Council is to be an act of parliament, and that would administer a code of ethics, which has been devised in 2002. There have been consultations, and the code of ethics, I think, needs to be tweaked and revised. But essentially, we cover all in terms of the components of the code of ethics. What is important here is to educate journalists on self-regulation, but also important to educate the public on what it means to have a self-regulated media. Here, it is not it is not to curb media freedom, but it's to give relative space for the journalistic media, space for journalism, space for opinions, the right of reply, the right to criticize, and so on, and also the use of information, definition of journalists and definition of journalism. We have been abeyance in who constitutes or what constitutes journalism. I think it's time that we deliberate on the status of the professional journalists. Another thing is, apart from the Media Council, also we're proposing a media commission. This is to replace the functions of the Ministry of Information and Communication and Multimedia with regard to legislative matters. and also with regard to the registration of media organizations. That's one. Second, in relation to that, because we have a lot of diversity in Malaysia, and we have vernacular newspapers, and we have different representations, what I've been advocating over the last 20 years is the funding for the Media Council. And not only the funding, but the funding to ensure equitable expression and representation through the media, in other words, through journalism and through journalistic organizations. I'll propose that the funding be through Parliament. Parliament ensures equitable funding to existing media and to the vernacular media with regard to maintaining democracy and maintaining equitable representation of opinions and debates. And also, this is also to ensure that national interests, mainstream values are in place, because from what I observed, mainstream values have collapsed after 2018, especially in terms of the slogan for the new Malaysia and so on. I think that it's as if there was no mainstream value. If you go back to the period of 1970-71, that was when institutions and reforms were made, and that was beyond and it transcended political party. That was a non-partisan initiative way back 50 years back. I think we need to look at that in terms of non-partisan mainstream value for the nation. The third area is on national language and language policy. I would like to return this to the speech of Tun Razak in 1971 at the opening of the language Congress, the National Culture Congress. And national culture has been held in abeyance over so long. In the last few years, I think the government has gotten the national culture policy to be reviewed, and I believe that the final documents have been circulated, at least among government ministries. But I suppose that there needs to be a continuous, transparent dialogue on the national culture policy, and we would have to look at the next 50 years, and we have to deliberate on what the policy constitutes and what the policy has been founded on from 1971. With that in mind too, number 4, I would want to refer to education and national unity, because we have a Ministry of National Unity. Earlier in the 70s, we had a National Unity Ministry, and now we have, but the Ministry of National Unity doesn't seem to bear significance to the nation. I would propose that the Ministry of National Unity be combined, rather the Ministry of Education be combined with culture and national unity. Therefore, we have a Ministry of National Unity, Education and Culture. We have been looking at education in a vacuum almost 64 years. I think education needs to be put in context, in the context of unity and in the context of culture. And this is where I'm going to say it out, that we need to have a one school system, and part of to establish a consciousness on the practice of and the understanding of national culture and national consciousness. My last point is what I see as a glaring absence in the report as well as in government initiatives. If we look at 2018, we have a series of reforms, but one reform missing, correct me if I'm wrong, is the reform on political parties, political culture and political behavior. Vis-a-vis, we're talking about the political party institution itself. I thought that with the present image and the character of politicians, parliamentarians, and so on, there must be some form of self-regulatory and regulatory mechanism for politicians. By politicians, I mean members of parliament, state legislative assembly members, as well as registered members of political parties. This has to be instituted. I think there has to be some form of regulated behavior and maybe a political ombudsman in Malaysia. And last point in this area is that elected representatives is to declare or electorates will give their feedback not once every 5 years or so, but perhaps once in 6 months to a body or mechanism which assesses their representatives in parliament or in the state assemblies. So thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Murad. Maybe YB Maria might later, when she gets a chance, comment about this regulatory framework on politicians. I think the idea of a feedback of the citizenry is important. Now we are more dependent on opinion polls in that assessment. So Prof, I think in all the presentations, I think you brought back the theme, because SDG 16 has the theme of promoting peaceful and inclusive society, and the narrative of the nation building is quite critical. I think in the EPU presentation, the reference to the National Unity Plan was mentioned. I think you brought in the Media Council and the Media Commission, which is important. I know time is passing by, but there are a number of questions that are there, and I thought I could try and get different panelists, maybe for the start from EPU's feedback, Inche Baidil, on 2 points. I think YB Maria raised that, and I see in the chat you have sort of answered that, but you might want to, the slide on access to legal aid is one comment you might want to make. The other is Tulesi Munusami has raised, what's the government effort to ensure no children are left behind, especially refugees, migrants, stateless children? Because in the SDGs, they make no distinction between citizen and non-citizen because of all the treaty. We are party to CEDAW and CRC. In terms of non-discriminatory access to protection, support, services, and justice. So if I can pass you the two questions, or you want to comment on anything, Sila, beri pandangan.
Okay, the first one, access of legal aid. I'm sorry, on the slide we generalized, but actually it's meant for the citizen of Malaysia. In terms of access of legal aid, it's quite specific. Now the government assists our citizens, especially those unfortunate, through the legal aids provided by government agencies, and as well as the government also, if bagian Biro Bantuan Guamam cannot effort to handle, they will pass over to the private legal institution. So I think in terms of the details, other than there is effort to enhance the act on legal aid also. Other than that, quite specific, maybe if need a further explanation from APU, we will fulfilled through email specifically on that. That's the effort for government efforts to ensure no children are left behind, especially refugee, migrant, and stateless children. This in terms of non-discriminatory access to protection, support, service, and justice. Various efforts actually are needed to enhance children's rights in Malaysia, in line with the Convention on the Right of the Children, and to strengthen policy and legislation. Also, in line with the second, third, and fourth national reports on the CRC, Convention on the Right of the Children, efforts include developing a new national child policy and national children well-being roadmap to plan action, as well as reviewing and amending the Child Act 2001. So in terms of, we have seen here, stateless, migrant, refugees. This one also related to sometimes in terms of trafficking in persons. There is a need to review and amend where appropriate the Anti-Trafficking in Persons and Anti-Smuggling of Migrant Act 2007 for children, to include the interests of children, especially the victims of trafficking. In terms of institutionally, stakeholders have called for strengthening the role of the Office of the Children's Commissioner, whereby the office is currently attached to Suhakam. Other than that, I would like to highlight also the issue on localizing SDG raised by our chairman himself. Currently, the government has put the effort to have VLR, voluntary local reviews, whereby the local authority will seek the involvement from all relevant parties to develop this VLR, voluntary local reviews. So it's supposed to raise awareness about the sustainability of SDGs, to bring communities and minorities closer to the decision-making process, and as well to identify key local issues raised directly by local communities. So there's what we say, involvement by the public as well, because the government also have been what we say, in terms of approach, we are going to a great mantra for what we say, whole nation approach, which involve the CSOs, the private, and as well the government agencies.
Okay.
I think that's all. I hand over to you,
Okay.
Prof. Dato'.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know there are a few questions. I will just highlight it because YB Maria or any of the other panelists can take it up. It's in the Q&A. Shanti Dairiam has a question on SDG 16 and the issue of discriminatory laws against women. Maybe YB Maria can take that. Andrew Koo has two questions. One is on Article 8.2 of the Federal Constitution. We know that the women groups lobbied to bring gender in. Should disability be a provision for constitutional protection? Andrew Koo also asked any comments from members the need to reform the law on hate speech, because our Prof. Murad raised about identity, harmony, and so forth, nation building and the promotion of peace. Daniel Alexander, the value of technical assistance, South-South cooperation. If we have time, we will take that. But let me just ask each of the panelists to make a comment, and also that will be a final comment, because today is Friday. I was told we must stop by 1:05. So each a minute or two, starting with YB, Maria, Anthony, and then Prof. Murad, in that order. YB?
I didn't think that Shanti was a question.
Oh, it's a comment, is it?
It's a
Okay.
comment, I think, about gender discrimination. I think that has to be taken up much more systematically, I think. And it shouldn't be just the Women's Ministry taking up that the gender issue. But it has to involve the other ministries. So the interconnectedness is quite there. I just want to quickly answer is the for the migrants and the refugees and all that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Baidile. I think there's a report which has not been presented in Parliament, a report on the migrants covering labor, covering their work, accommodation, and their economic status. But that report has not actually been presented to Parliament. That report is rather comprehensive in dealing with not just the migrants coming into work, but also the social welfare issues of education, health, and so forth. So perhaps that report needs to be made public, so that we can actually see where we can actually help to improve this migrant situation, particularly when it comes to a crisis like this, where their accommodation is not looked into, and so the name blaming has always been on the migrant, that that they never take care of the SOPs and all that. But in the first place, the SOPs have never been set, when you cram people into crowded accommodation and so forth. The other thing is really about not including the disabled persons into the Constitution. Definitely, we need to look into that. So my last statement is really that if we want to really make sure that we strengthen our institutions, talking to each other is important, but I think that including people into it, into our the way we regulate, the way we develop policies is very important. We have to start listening to people who face the realities on a daily basis, so that we have better policies. And I'm not talking about big convention to have dialogues, yeah. Small town hall meetings with people to keep track of what they think and give us the feedback are also important efforts as well, because from the bottom, we would be able to develop top-notch policies. Thank you.
YB, any comment on Professor Murad's regulatory framework on politicians? Just a one-liner or two, yes, good idea or bad idea?
I think it's a good idea. Anyway, you're monitoring in terms of the political financing part. But we have been always talking about the Political Finance Act. Yeah, that has to be implemented, not just politicians, but political parties as well.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much, YB. Anthony, any thoughts on any of the comments?
Yeah, I think we have to recognize that dignity is very important for everyone, whether it's citizens or non-citizens. I often question, why is it if somebody comes from Denmark, they are known as an expatriate. If a person comes from Bangladesh and sweeps the road, is known as a foreign worker. It's totally undignified. We have to treat everyone in a more dignified manner. whether they are citizens or non-citizens. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. Prof. Murad?
Yeah, on the regulation of political parties, it would mean political parties, registered members, and parliamentarians. It is also not only on political financing. It will be on aspects of behavior, absence from constituencies, statements made, appointments, and so on. So I think that there needs to be ombudsman. I think we need to go back to the idea of a non-partisan or bipartisan group at all levels, and especially like Maria mentioned about the local level. So the district level or the constituency level must have a mechanism to mediate and to have discussions, conversations at that level. Federal level is one thing, but at the local level, at the constitution level is another. So there must be a formal mechanism where people like me, electorates, the common people will know where to go and lodge their complaints. And lastly, I think that the in terms of the national narrative and nation building, there has to be an honest, ongoing, honest conversation. It's a process. It's a project and a process where honest acceptance or disagreement must happen. I'm not talking about a monolithic national agenda. I'm talking about a variety of national agendas, and everybody must be included. At this point in time, there are people who are excluded from the national agenda. They don't know what's happening. They're not in the mainstream. So when you say that we need to have mainstream, it's a national mainstream. Whether we agree or not with the national mainstream is another thing, but we have to be engaged with the national mainstream. And you have to know the parameters of, I would use the word Grundnorm. The parameters are the Grundnorm of the nation and nation building. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know in the chat, Shanti has clarified her point, but because of time, I think her question was not to YB Maria, but to EPU on the blueprint follow-up on non-discrimination. Any pandangan to that?
Okay,
roadmap ada ke apa on non-discrimination gender?
Okay, actually under Goal 16, it does say something about women and the law and violence against women, but it just briefly touched upon it. The fact of discrimination in the law against women, including in the Constitution, is not acknowledged, nor does VNR show any intention to remedy this. Nevertheless, there's no adequate legal framework for equality of women. The Constitution only provides for prohibition of discrimination. That's quite clear, but imposes no obligation for positive duties to enable equality between women and men. So in the draft plan, actually, safety and security issues will be continued to address in strengthening both civil and Sharia law for the purpose of enhancing women's right awareness and intervention programs. Other than that, legislation to address sexual harassment and gender inequalities will also be formulated to ensure a safe environment as well as eliminate violence. That's a general because the government also put effort in gender mainstreaming framework that will be introduced to incorporate gender perspective in formulating policies.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that additional explanation. I think we have come to the end of this session, and I would like to thank YB Maria, Encik Baidil bin Ghazali of EPU, Mr. Anthony Tan, and Professor Murad for your views. I know what has emerged, and I hope EPU can note is that there are many ongoing issues, and let this be a part of a continuing discussion and dialogue. As one of the organizers of this two-day event, let me also take this opportunity to thank all the role players, the organizing Masa Institute, APPG, the speakers, EPU, the UN, the Malaysian CSO. We had over 29 role players. This is not the end. I would see this as the start of an ongoing process. And over the next 4 years, we will continue in our relationship and the multi-stakeholder at the federal level, at the district level, and definitely at the local authority level as well in this ongoing, and taking up all the various issues. We have promised to do a comprehensive report, which we would publish, I think, within a month, and then try and institute some working groups and follow-up groups so that we can see the suggestions, the areas, and consistent follow-up of many of these things. So with that note, thank you. I'm sure we can go on and on. Sorry, my battery is dying on me. Go on further, but thank you very much. And I pass it back to the MC for the final wrap up. Thank you to Masa. Thank you to this panel. Thank you to all the speakers and participants. We still have 82 people, which is very good on a Friday afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Dr. Dennison, for this final session, for moderating as well, governance, social cohesion, and partnership. Very exciting indeed. Yes, COVID-19 has exposed a lot of things, a lot of cracks, and a lot of issues that have been swept under the carpet for many years. I believe everything needs connectivity with one another, when to not leave anyone behind as well. Well, we'd like to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this wonderful event. Now, do fill in the survey form that we have in the chat box later. Farah has just posted it. If you would be able to fill it up as well, we would appreciate it very much. Also, finally, to thank Institute Masa Depan Malaysia, the All-Party Parliamentary Group Malaysia on Sustainable Development Goals, in partnership with the Economic Planning Unit, the Malaysian CSO-SDG Alliance, and UN Malaysia Country Team for this wonderful consultation session right now on what we have to share here today. And thank you once again to everybody. I'm sure we've got a long roadmap to go. Something I always live by, that I always tell my kids, men, women, if you want to change the world, most important of all, fix your home first. And Malaysia is our home. So I'm Malaysian first. And my name is Sharizan, and we'd like to thank each and every one of you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tengku, Masa technical team, as well for all your support.
Thank you, everyone. See you again.
Thank you, Tengku.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Masa.
Goodbye.
Happy to us. Don't forget
Thank you, EPU.
submission of your laporans. Thank you.
I've already sent.
Okay. Thank you, Richard.
Well done, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.